What is up, y'all? It's your boy Anki coming at you with an MHA chapter review from My Hero Academia, chapter 337. You already know we do all that page by page breakdown, so we're gonna get right into it because this chapter is once again, for those of you who are not aware, pushing the notion of the multi-traitor theory that I and many others have been on board for a while now. So let's get into it. First off, I like the fact that we immediately come back to Dobby and All For One's questioning and conversation. And this is part of the reason why I say this, because friends to spare, we're consistently emphasizing the plurality of All For One's companions. And Dobby's like, aren't we screwed if one of your friends get caught? This idea that if a piece that All For One has on the board that is infiltrating UA gets taken off the table, aren't they in danger? And All For One says, not in the least. Say your 100 yen lighter fizzles out, what would you do? Now, it's worth noting that this particular speech bubble is held over Shigaraki's body as Spinner is comforting him, which means that there's a couple of ways you can look at this, which is All For One's been talking about how he wants a long life and to extend further and do all these other things. But it's worth noting that especially with Aoyama being Deku's friend and, you know, whatever he's asked for information or updates on since the last time, with this in mind, All For One probably knows about Eri. And that's a scary thing to think about. All For One's view already could be, I will have the second traitor help me get Eri to restore my body with using forced quirk activation on her so that he can get better. Shigaraki could be the 100 yen lighter, but you could also see, and this is important because it's a 100 yen lighter, which is only like $1. You could also see this as a reference to Aoyama being cheaper and him undervaluing Aoyama, or you could see it as him seeing Spinner as expendable too. But I'm of the belief that Spinner is going to cause some major problems for All For One in the future, possibly even something as simple as severing his life support machines so that he cannot live any further. Now, he says, when my friends succeed, I rejoice. And should they fail, I think, what a shame. And after that brief disappointment, I move on to the next viable route for my plan. And that's the other thing. If he's got multiple viable routes, then it wouldn't make sense for him to only have one traitor within the walls of UA, whether it's other civilian plants, whether it's, you know, Nezu, like I've suspected and talked about in previous videos, whatever the case may be, there's very much likely, you know, another traitor sitting around, and that he even goes on further to say that they're less like tools, friends, and more like disposable tools, which we already know, like All For One doesn't actually care about these people. He just likes having power and a reason to say that, like, well, because we help each other, we're friends, but in reality, he doesn't care. Now, at the very least, Aoyama's parents start to kind of step up here and try to protect him. They say, run away, Yuga, hold on. And it's worth noting, though, that when Aoyama starts talking, he says, you know, Mama, Papa, me being quirkless caused you no small amount of dismay. Both of you came from wealthy, privileged families and never wanted for anything in your own upbringings. Aoyama is already born into a different world than his parents just by inherently being born quirkless. And furthermore, it makes him stand out and seem less like the normal of today in the terms of My Hero Academia. And that's why he says, the two of you fretted over my being different from the other children even more than I did. This basically hardline confirms they have kind of gaslit him into taking the blame for getting a quirk, for wanting one when he was 4 and trying to do all that other stuff. But in reality, it was their fault. They were afraid, they felt shamed by their son who was born quirkless, and they went out of their way to follow this dubious rumor. And it's worth noting that even Deku found some whispers on the internet looking for a way to get a quirk online or ways to develop a quirk. He had kind of, because he had mentioned in the prior chapters that, you know, he had heard things about All For One online, but nothing concrete. So we'd already kind of heard about these rumors, and now this kind of double allows for Aoyama to serve as a what-if scenario for Deku, coming into contact with All For One instead of All Might, and getting a quirk from him instead of getting his quirk from All Might, and then the path that would lead him on due to obligation, etc. That also is what makes me feel weird about like the idea of it potentially being Dad for One. Like I know a lot of people talk about, and it's been in the discussions again, where it would be odd if we would have this parallel, and then All For One is all supposed to be Deku's dad, but whatever. And so Aoyama starts talking about how he suffered at the hands of his quirk, going back to how he talked about how him and Deku were the same, and how his parents feared him being different, and so his dream was born of their fears. Aoyama's goal is similar to Uraraka's in that he really just wants his parents to be happy. And in his mind, getting a quirk and then using this quirk to be a hero to help people to not necessarily stand out from the standpoint of, oh, he's quirkless, but standing out in a way that's considered a positive and, a way to really fit into society and be the best of it. That is something that he felt like his parents would approve of. So this is about the happiness of his parents far more than it's ever been about the happiness of Aoyama, involving him acquiring a quirk and living and doing what it takes to please All For One. Now, we get into when All For One is like, yep, All Might's going to be working at UA where you got in. But he also says you will be attending UA, which leads me to question if maybe All For One pulled some strings. Totally possible, because I believe that Nezu is a traitor, like I said. So that could be part of he guaranteed Aoyama got in. We don't know. We get the cut back to when he was just hiding behind a building and, revealing the location of the USJ and telling them, getting information and being tucked away hidden. We get the flashback to confirming that he's the one who told him about the training camp. And then we see that the latest order was that when Midoriya got back, that Aoyama was supposed to isolate him. And there's a chance that what this was going to do is All For One was finally going to utilize that teleportation quirk, because the Gunk teleportation quirk has been sitting on the back burner. That Gunk teleportation quirk has been sitting on the back burner as a Chekhov's gun. Aoyama has clearly been dealing with All For One for a long time. He should be able to pull him to him. He said himself that it only works best on people he is close to, and he can only pull them to him or send them away. So the goal may have been for Aoyama to be with Deku, for All For One himself to pull up, or for All For One to teleport Aoyama and Deku next to each other to him. It's worth noting that, so these are just things to think about, and it's worth noting that before they really get into a scuffle, Deku's danger sense goes off. When Aoyama's telling him about how he was despairing when he found out that Deku was quirkless and still chose a better path, he starts to freak out, and he can tell that he's actually going to attack him. And so when Aoyama fires the naval laser, Invisible Girl uses her refraction, and it's worth noting that the way her hands are postured let me know that the stoppage was done with the left hand and the redirecting on the right, or vice versa. It's kind of hard to tell with the posturing, but it's looking like the right hand redirected the laser while the left hand caught it so that she could refract it. Now, we finally get her face revealed too, as she's crying and yelling at Aoyama, asking him what was going through his head. And it's worth noting that Aoyama, Mina, and Hagakure did their work studies together under Yoroi Musha, which I guess it's worth noting that since Aoyama pulled the sword out of his navel, and Yoroi Musha said that he would fall on his sword, which is typically when you take the sword and you place it through that area, that was another foreshadowing of how Yoroi Musha would be a fraud, just like Aoyama. So that's something you can take into consideration too. And the parents finally do a good job in this scene a little bit by saying, you have it wrong, our dear Yuga only ever. And then Deku just nah, wrapped up. And it's worth noting that when you look at Deku's face, there's all these dark lines over it. And he says, listen, Aoyama, Hagakure just did you a favor. She doesn't want you hurting anyone else, okay? And the fact that Deku activated One for All and had Danger Sense go off kind of leads me to believe that he was going to dodge. But if Aoyama had started like firing at him repeatedly, then he probably would have lost control and just fought him. And nothing good for Aoyama would have came out of that. If Deku, while fighting Bakugo back when he only could reasonably do 8% and stay in control, or 5% and stay in control, and slipped up to 8 due to frustration, then something like this after the month he had been through while running around during the Deku Far From Home arc, and then to go ahead and experience this now, he would probably have lost control in a fight between him and Aoyama, and then that just leads to Aoyama being injured, and then he has to, then it's this matter of he say, she say, him and Hagakure saying that Aoyama was the traitor, and Aoyama being rendered unconscious or possibly even, dead, because he does not seem like somebody who would be able to handle Deku accidentally hitting him with like a 45% smash. So, now, there's something about this chapter too, because some people have said that they think that All Might's friend on the police force is corrupt, and he's a member or a supporter of All for One. And there is something about that could be supported within this chapter. So, he's like, I got the gist. He gave the boy a quirk and took control of the family. The quirk was granted about a decade ago. And since he hasn't exploded, that lets us know it's not rigged. So, like, the detonating quirk thing could be a new feature. Nezu asked the children to leave the room, which I consider to be very sketchy. And if you look back to even when the traitor was first introduced, he's behaved a little sketchy. And as always, when an animal humanoid hybrid talks to Shoto, he defies them. And so you can kind of see that Mina is just fully distraught. Mineta's definitely shocked, but it seems to be that the people most painfully affected by Aoyama being the traitor are Deku, Invisible Girl, and Mina. And Ojiro being right there by her side to comfort her and ask him what he would have done if she hadn't caught him. And Bakugo's being pensive over the idea that another one of them was born quirkless. And I'm assuming this is more over to do with the fact that Deku does not take himself into account. This has been established as one of his biggest issues. So to a certain degree, Bakugo may be wondering how Deku sees himself in relation to Aoyama, but Deku not having a monologue makes sense because he does not think about himself. And a lot of people thought that the arc was the villain hunt arc, but it was genuinely Deku Far From Home, and a way for him to figure out, and for us to see the kind of conflicts that he was going to be dealing with going forward. Villains who aren't fully villains but are manipulated by All For One, people who are convicted to being dedicated to evil, and more importantly, conflicts of dealing with his own self-worth issues. In Class 1A versus Midoriya, stuff like that. So this is him getting another catalyst to push him to really identify and think about the way he treats himself and views himself in relation to everyone else, and how he feels about his time being quirkless, and how people treat him when he was quirkless versus how they treat him now that he's got one of the most powerful quirks in the world, and how it was when it was in between, when they didn't know it was one of the most powerful quirks but just saw it as a good one. Now, with the police officer talking about how we're still trying to restore order, it's worth noting that Yuga's Aoyama's father says, should we fail, he'll kill us, and if we lie to him, we're dead. Now, Sukauchi's sister from Vigilantes has a quirk that is essentially a polygraph. If she's holding your hand, or if she's holding you while she talks to you, she can tell if you're lying, as long as you answer the question right. Now, there is a bit of a whiff with this when she asked the crawler his identity, because a lot of people call him the Cruller. So when she held his hand and asked him if he was the Cruller, he said no, and it didn't trigger as a lie because she said the wrong name. So there's obviously some conditions to it, but it could be now that Sukauchi has lost his sister, or she's been captured by All For One and is being used as a chip against him, since capturing families to control people is a method of his. And with Sukauchi being close to All Might, there's very little chance that over time All For One has not figured that out. So if people believe that Sukauchi is one of the people on the police force that is corrupt, that would make sense. It also would make All Might feel like a bigger failure if one of his best friend's sisters was taken by All For One, and that leak was basically caused by his missing something, and a consistent outpouring of information had been caused by him trusting the person closest to him, kind of setting up for like just how Aoyama was one of the closest people to Deku after, Kamino, and they started becoming friends, and then he was betraying him. So we could have a lot here, because All For One taking Shigaraki was partially to be petty towards Nana, but also to make All Might feel bad about the fact that his sensei's kid was taken. Now, we know that he often gave them a demonstration on how he kills people, and they mentioned that it wasn't somebody even important. It was just like a lackey that went to jail eventually and was still killed for it. And it's worth noting that several characters have different facial responses to what's going on. Many people just seem distraught or stunned, but people like Ida seem to be actually angry almost with Aoyama. So as Aoyama's talking about what he's been doing, how he's been betraying them, what made him feel worse, the aspects of, Deku being born quirkless and then going a different path, making him feel like he's truly, scummy. And then us having, like, him saying, I'm rotten to the core. And then Deku brings up one of the most important moments. We've always questioned why Aoyama and Dabi seemed to have that scene where it looked like Dabi saw him but then chose not to acknowledge him. And I've pointed out and believe that, if we had a kill list, then there could be a safe list too for the students. It's worth noting that Dabi himself likely would have been very willing to kill Aoyama if he were a traitor, based on, the whole Stain's will thing. But it's kind of obvious by this point that Dabi's will isn't exactly Stain's will, and that killing a kid there wasn't going to necessarily do what he wanted it, or at the very least killing Aoyama wouldn't do what he wanted. So when Deku confronts him, he brings up, Aoyama, you did say Bakugo and Tokoyami, and that might be part of why Tokoyami and Bakugo have taken a calmer approach, because Kirishima's willing to yell, Kaminari seems willing to yell, you have multiple students crying, but these two specifically look rather pensive about it, because they can understand that there's more to it than just how he felt or what he wanted to achieve. And so when we're talking about the cheese, when Aoyama was trying to incriminate himself, and Deku saying he feels bad because he didn't realize that Aoyama was trying to reach out to him and let him know. But we get some payoff from Nagant already with him talking about how just because, if somebody wants to be a hero and they get led astray, that doesn't mean that they're a bad person. And we even saw him start to think about this back when he had met Gentle. So it's kind of important that we're seeing a payoff for him being able to reach out and sympathize with villains. And while a lot of people I know are upset about this, it is imperative that you understand that him just being spiteful towards Aoyama forever would be in complete contradiction, one, to his character, but even more importantly, it would be a complete contradiction to what's trying to be achieved through the themes of the story. Horikoshi has made it very obvious that he feels like someone like Twice is a criminal because of the way people gave up on him and mistreated him, and decided that he was a villain from a young age and that he never deserved any sympathy. He's making it clear that that's supposed to play a part in what made Toga a villain. So why would he have Deku go ahead and replicate the same behaviors that have plagued and caused issues in hero society all this time? For somebody who is a 16-year-old child being extorted by the biggest villain in Japanese history. How does that make sense to you? Like, is it purely like, well, it would have been really hype if they I just wanted to see some brains on that bad boy. Like, but that's not necessarily good storytelling or a logical narrative. That's just you wanting somebody to get beat up for the sake of watching somebody get beat up. Is that the bar for analysis and honest critique these days? Come on, guys. Now, if nothing else, we can choose how to enter this fight. When Deku reaches out to Aoyama, that immediately pops into Bakugo's head and he says, Deku, I get it now. And I've seen people talk about, like, you know, hey, this is what, you know, Bakugo's figuring out what he was lacking, which is, you know, that compassion and that willingness to look out and care for other villains or other people in general. And if you think back to when him and Shoto got their licenses, there was the Cider House gang where he just told them to get a job and whooped them up and went about his day. And in a lot of ways, that was kind of how All Might handled things too, which goes to show you again that whole parallel between Deku and All Might each inheriting part of his spirit, where All Might wanted to assure civilians, but he never really put enough thought into the villains. And so that assurance is something that Deku was really good at and handling business, but he didn't necessarily have the skill at the beginning to whoop people just left and right like Bakugo did. And like Bakugo's improved and he's been able to do it really well. But he then also had to make sure that he learned to be more sympathetic and friendly towards people. That's one of the things. So when you see Deku say, you can still be a hero, you're finally seeing Deku kind of do for others what has been done for him. Deku has been encouraged by All Might. He was welcomed back by Uraraka, he's had so many people supporting him and lifting him up throughout the story. And now he's finally in a position and he's in this opportunity narratively to provide it to another character who needs it just as much for the same reasons. That validation that you can be a hero, that you, even as a person who was born quirkless, have value. Even as a person who's been led astray, have value. You all have value. You can be a hero. Not only functions as a narrative clip for them being able to be a superhero within the story of My Hero Academia, but it's also a way of just kind of establishing that you as a person have value. And if you think back to what the song Jiro wrote for the Culture Festival was, that we got the confirmation and filling out of, for the anime, it was Hero 2. I am a hero with my sound, with music, being able to uplift people, being able to help people. It's more to being a hero than just punching and kicking and doing all these other things. So even if he hadn't done that, his spirit to protect his parents, his willingness and guilt over what happened to the other students, those are aspects that make Aoyama a hero. The quirk is just there to be used. It's a tool. It is a part of his body. It's like incriminating somebody for having a leg. The quirk isn't what decides if you're a hero or not, even if you need one to handle most cases of villainy. So this is something that hopefully, as Deku helps Aoyama come to grips with this, Bakugo can, or somebody else in the classroom or one of the teachers can help him come to grips with his understanding and understand to value himself too. Hopefully that's the stuff we get out of this. I'm going to leave this video here because there's a lot of interesting directions that this can go, and I don't want to bloat it too much because we're already over 20 minutes. So I hope you guys enjoy the content. I really want to see you guys next Sunday for the Church of MHA. We're coming up on a couple of breaks soon. Might have a surprise video for you guys on Thursday. We'll see if I can get it done and get around to doing all the stuff that I want to do for that video to make it happen. That said, I'm Aniki, and I am out. Have a nice day.